If you spend enough time studying soldier accounts from the major conflicts of the 20th century, you start to notice a strange pattern. The official gear lists are long, detailed, and sometimes even glamorous on paper. But the stories that come from the trenches, the dugouts, the jungle outposts, and the frozen mountains reveal something different. What kept men alive wasn't always the gear issued to them. It was the quiet, uncelebrated, often improvised items they carried, things so ordinary they never made it into the manuals, and sometimes never even made it into letters home. And that's what we're breaking down today. Because when you study the realities of battlefield survival, you realize the difference between discomfort and death can come down to a handful of forgotten items no historian ever includes on their lists. So, before we dive into the deeper analysis, here's your hook. There's a soldier from the Italian front in the First World War whose diary mentions that he survived a freezing night because of an object so trivial he didn't even bother describing it until years later. A United States Marine on Guadalcanal credited his survival not to a rifle or rations, but to something he found on the ground and never let go of. And a British sapper in North Africa carried a household item in his breast pocket every single day. Not for comfort, but because it once saved his friend's life in a sandstorm. These items aren't talked about, they were never standard issue, and yet they kept men alive. That's why we're discussing them today, because understanding them gives you a clearer, more grounded perspective on real battlefield survival than any polished documentary ever will. Now let's break down the 9 survival items soldiers never spoke about, and how you can apply the logic behind them today. The first unspoken survival item is the humble pocket sewing kit. Not the neat modern version, but the field-expedient one soldiers made themselves. They used it to repair torn uniforms, mend webbing straps, reinforce boot seams, and even stitch gear to reduce noise when moving at night. A British sniper in the First World War wrote that loose metal fittings could cost you your life, and the only way to silence them was by stitching cloth around the buckles. The modern lesson here is simple. Repair capability is survival capability. In any long-term field scenario, the ability to quietly fix your gear matters more than you think. The second item, rarely mentioned, is a small square of linseed-oiled cloth. Troops used it across multiple wars to protect rifle actions from dust, rain and salt air. But more than that, it worked as a fire starter, a moisture barrier, and even a wind block for tiny flame sources. This wasn't standard issue. Soldiers created it themselves. For modern survivalists, the takeaway is that multi-purpose materials outperform single-purpose tools in the field. Third is the wax stub. Soldiers carried leftover candle pieces to waterproof thread, seal letters, stiffen bootlaces, or coat match heads to keep them dry. A French soldier wrote that wax was the difference between a fire and a cold night in the trenches. Today, if you're building any kind of field kit, a small piece of wax candle gives you weatherproofing, ignition support, and repair capability in one pocket-sized item. The fourth item is the metal canteen cup lid. Most armies didn't issue lids, so soldiers fabricated them from scrap tin or ration tins. A lid halved boil time, kept debris out, and saved fuel. On the Russian front, German troops learned quickly that a cup without a lid meant more exposure to wind and more precious time spent over a fire. The application today is pretty straightforward. Efficiency in the field multiplies your survival time, and a simple metal lid can save both fuel and energy. The fifth unspoken item is the piece of soft wire. Soldiers used it to fix broken pack frames, secure rifle slings, hang pots over fires, repair boots, or reinforce shelter corners. Wire showed up everywhere in memoirs, but never in official inventories. Carrying a short coil of soft, pliable wire today gives you structural capability that cordage alone just can't match. The sixth item is the bit of charcoal wrapped in cloth. Soldiers used it to filter water when tablets weren't available, reduce odours in their kits, and even treat certain gastrointestinal issues. Not all charcoal worked, but the intentionally burnt hardwood did. Understanding this today helps you replicate improvised filtration if commercial filters fail. The seventh item soldiers never mentioned was the mirror shard. Not the fancy signalling mirror, but a cracked piece from a broken compact or vehicle mirror. Soldiers used them for shaving, inspecting wounds, checking for lice, reading facial expressions in low light, and signalling aircraft or nearby units. The smallest reflective surface offered enormous utility, and this principle still applies. Never underestimate lightweight tools with high visibility value. The eighth unspoken item was the crushed tobacco pouch, even among non-smokers. The tobacco itself deterred insects when sprinkled in bedding, and the pouches stored char cloth, needles, flints, or note scraps. A First World War corporal described it as the soldier's unofficial utility pouch. The modern application is the value of compact sealable containers for micro-items. The ninth item, almost never discussed, is the folded newspaper sheet. Soldiers used it for insulation in boots, improvised bandages, fire starting, and even as crude padding under thin uniforms. A simple piece of newspaper could add hours of warmth. Today, the lesson is clear. Lightweight, disposable insulation matters more than heavy gear when temperatures drop unexpectedly. When you study these items together, you start to see a pattern. Real survival isn't glamorous. It's small, repeatable advantages. It's improvisation combined with practicality. And understanding these forgotten items gives you a more complete picture of battlefield life than any equipment manual ever written. If you want more grounded, historical and practical breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and help grow our battlefield survival community.